From the American public's perspective, there are really two broad areas I think that they would want Republican candidates to address. And one of them is the more obvious one, which is issues. That's probably the no-brainer for candidates because they spend a lot of their time talking about issues. And by far, the dominant issue right now for Americans is the economy. And embedded with that are concerns about jobs. So clearly, and this will come up in any discussion of the election next year, what do candidates want to do about the economy? What do they propose to do about the economy? And that's what American public would like to hear them talk about. Really, below the economy on the issue scale, there's not a lot there. You have to go way down to find concern about things like even health care or immigration or some of what could be hot button issues. Even foreign affairs is down the list. Americans are really mostly concerned about the economy. But studying the American public really leads us to a second whole area of questions for, I think, the Republican candidates, and that has to do with their image, themselves. That is, the image of politicians. We have a really bad situation today in America where Americans simply are really down on their elected representatives. They're down on Congress, they're down on Washington, D.C., they're down on the federal government in general. Some of these are the lowest points we've seen in history, like a 13% job approval rating for Congress. That's tied for the lowest in history. Americans have less confidence in Congress than any other institution that we test here at Gallup. And Americans' positive image of the federal government generically is lower than any other business or industry sector that we measure at Gallup. So the question for these Republican candidates, I think, at the debate is, what would you do about the way that Washington functions to change things? Part of the problem is partisanship. Americans don't like partisanship. Some of the candidates at the debate are going to be highly partisan, so a question to ask them is, what would you do to be less partisan, to seek compromise, because that's what the American public wants. And finally, the data really suggests that Americans want more efficiency out of government. The bad news is that Americans simply doesn't think that the federal government does things well. They bumble, they're inefficient, they don't do them well. And so I would think the public would say to these candidates, what are you going to do to make the government function better just in terms of doing its day in and day out jobs? So that's what I think the American public would want to know from these candidates as they talk at Dartmouth about what they would do if elected president.